Okay, hello everybody. This is tutorial 2, and let me get the screen set up. Alright, so today what the plan is to go over some coding bat problems, which I'm not sure if Mr. Moore mentioned this in lecture, but Coding Bat is this website that gives you access to a bunch of different basically coding practice problems for Java and Python, and obviously you guys will be using the Python problems. So yeah, that's what we're going to be working on. I want to point a couple quick things out. For anybody who hasn't seen, if you go to our course website on Avenue, you'll see that they're now, if I view this as a student, there is now a new tab called T02 content, which is our tutorial section. And you see here there's a subfolder called tutorial 1 where I uploaded all the content that we used in tutorial 1, or all the content that we covered. So whenever it's relevant, I'm going to be adding these for each tutorial. So if you ever want to look back on something that we covered in tutorial, you will find all the content here. including the relevant notebook file for JupyterHub, and any extra content if there is any. So just wanted to point that out. And additionally, I wanted to point out that we are on Piazza, if you guys haven't noticed. So any questions now, instead of going to the Trello board, we're going to be using Piazza instead, which is way better. This is what we used last time when I TA'd this course, and it is really, really helpful, very convenient. And you can see here there's already a question, and it's very nicely formatted, and a student can give an answer, and then an instructor can also give an answer, and multiple students can give answers, and there can be discussion, and we can very easily link between different questions if that hear me properly or not. It's really loud. Okay, hopefully that didn't break my stream. Can you guys still hear me? If anybody can just confirm. Then hopefully we can get started. Okay, I think we're still good. So I'm going to keep going. The plan for today is we're going to go over these problems, and what we're going to do is I'm going to go to the problem. I'm going to show you guys the problem itself, and then I'm going to give you guys time to make an attempt at that problem, and then I'll take it up and kind of show the solution and show the thought process of how we got to that solution. So if everybody can quickly go to codingbat.com/Python, I'll post it in the chat as well, just in case anybody needs it. And once everybody's over there, we can start. So the first problem we're going to do is going to be in the folder called warmup1, and it's parrot trouble. So we go here to warmup1, and we look for the problem named parrot trouble. And we go over here. And so here's the problem. This is what the CodingBat interface looks like. So we're given a problem description. It says here that we have a loud talking parrot. There's an hour parameter, which is the current hour time in the range between 0 and 23 inclusive. And we are in trouble if the parrot is talking when the hour is between 7, when the hour is either before 7 or after 20. So basically, this function is supposed to return true if we are in trouble, and false if we are not in trouble. And here are some test cases for you to kind of see some examples of when our function would return true and when it would return false. We see here that if talking is true and hour is 6, then the hour is before 7 or after 20, so we return true. And here are 2 more examples. So I'm going to give you guys a couple minutes. This one's a pretty simple one. So if you guys can go ahead and try and think of what would be here in this function, and then I'll take it up. And feel free to throw things in the chat. If you guys think you know the answer, or if you think you have any suggestions or ideas, just toss them in there. Does anybody have any ideas? Okay, so for this one, I'm going to take it up. For the next ones, I'm going to give you guys a bit more time to try and figure it out. But hopefully this one's not too bad. Basically, we're only ever in trouble if the parrot is talking and the hour is either before 7 or after 20. So here, basically, this question is testing our ability to evaluate a conditional expression. So we're basically just returning, and actually let me make this bigger because I feel like the screen size is too small. We are returning true if the parrot is talking, so talking, and hours before 7 or hours after 20. And note that we would have to put brackets around this. And I'm going to explain that. Basically, there is a precedence when it comes to the and or operators. And one of the things that we use to remember it is this acronym NOW, which stands for not, and, or. Basically, the way, like you can imagine that there's like a PEDMAS, but for these three operators, and the order of precedence goes from not to and to or. So and binds more tightly than or does, which means that if we didn't have these brackets here, the implicit brackets that Python would imagine would be here. And that is because and binds more tightly than or. So Python would actually think that this is how it should interpret the command if we didn't have brackets at all. If it was like this, it would imagine brackets around this part, which is why we have to override this precedence by putting our own brackets to specify that we actually want the or to be treated as one thing, right? We want to return true if the parrot is talking and the hour is less than 7 or the hour is greater than 20. So hopefully that makes sense. And you can see here that if we try and compile our function there, we get all of the different test cases that it ran, and they all pass, which means they all give the correct expected output. And we get here in a message that says all correct. So hopefully this one was kind of easy to understand. I'll just show you guys one more time that this is going to work because if talking is true, then it'll be true and the value of this expression. And if this is true, then true and true is going to be true, which will return true, which is what we want. However, if talking is false, then it doesn't even matter what the hour's value is, because the parrot's not talking. So false and anything is always going to be false. That's like an identity of ands, and kind of, if you guys have ever done like circuitry or like logic, and means that both conditions have to be true. And so if one of them is false, then the whole condition's not true. It's going to be false. So if anybody has any questions about that, feel free to throw them on. And in the meantime, we're going to move on. So we can see here that our next one is this one called combo string, which is in the string1 folder. So if we go back over here to Python, and we go to string1, it's over here with combo string. So for this one, I'm actually going to give you guys a couple minutes to have a shot at actually writing the function yourselves. And I strongly encourage you guys to please throw any ideas or suggestions you have about how to write the function in the chat if you guys get any ideas. But yeah, so you guys can have a few minutes to read over the question and try and think of some ideas on how to solve it. All right, I'm going to start explaining it. Nobody seems to have any ideas. That's okay. So we're given two strings. As you can see here, our function takes in two strings, and we're going to call them A and B. And we want to return a string that's in the format short, long, short. So we want the shorter string between the two, then the longer string, then the shorter string. So basically, whichever of the two strings is the longer string is going to be sandwiched between the shorter of the two strings on either side. Now, how do we know which of the two strings is the shorter one? Well, we can actually test to see which of the two is the shorter one by using length, which is what someone in the chat suggested. So well done. Basically, what we can do is we can say, if the length of A is less than the length of B, then that's one of our two cases. So we can handle this separately. And then we can say something here, else, and we can say something here. Because if you think about it, there's only two cases. Since they told us that the strings cannot be the same length, then there are only two cases. Either A is the shorter one, or B is the shorter one. So I'm sure you guys can figure it out from here. We're going to be using string concatenation to concatenate together the different strings that we want to return a final string. So we're going to have something along the lines of A plus B plus A. Right? Because when we use the plus operator with strings, we concatenate them, which means we kind of glue them together, as you can see here, right? This example is pretty clear. We got a question in the chat about the case for if the strings are empty, and I'll cover that in a second. But first, let's just consider the second case between the two, which is if B is actually the shortest string, right? This is if A is shorter than B. In the other case, B is shorter than A, which means we would have B sandwiching A. And that will work. Let's consider the case where the strings may be empty. That's actually okay, because when you concatenate an empty string, it doesn't really do anything to the original string. So for example, we can say consider the case where one of the strings is empty. For example, let's say A was ABBA and B was equal to an empty string. Well then, adding these two together would simply give you back the original string, because it's basically like adding 0 to a number. Like x plus 0 is equal to x, in the same way that some string plus the empty string is equal to that original string. Which means that we don't have to actually modify our solution, because this case won't actually change anything about how this should work. So if we submit this, we'll see that all of the different test cases that it suggests and runs actually work out. So we have all correct here. Does anybody have any questions about this solution? And I just realized I should probably store these. So I'm going to keep a track of these. So that I can upload them to Avenue and you guys can see them later on. Cool. What if you wanted to add a space? That's a great question. So in this actual question, we don't need to add a space because it doesn't want one. But if we did want to add a space, we could simply do something like this, right? And hopefully you can see how that would make sense. right? Basically, that's going to have B concatenated with a space, concatenated with A, concatenated with a space, concatenated with B. So if we ran these, it's not very clear because of how squished this box is, but AAA and 1, 2, 3, 4, there's actually a space here. So it's A space 1, 2, 3, 4. Here we go. If I zoom out, you can see it. But clearly here there's a space between them. So hopefully that answers your question, Alifer. And yes, these are going to be posted on the new tutorial tab. But I want to cover them in person with you guys, so you guys can see how I'm reaching that solution. Because it's all about the thought process for these. You want to have the correct approach, and it will make your life a lot easier. So that's there, and that works. So we can move on to the next cell unless anybody has any questions about this function. So feel free to ask anything else about this. If not, we will move on to the next, which is squirrel play. And that can be found under the Logic 1 folder. So we'll head over to Python again, and we'll go to Logic 1, and here's squirrel play. So I'm going to give you guys another couple minutes to try and read this over and try and generate some ideas about how we might approach it or solve it. And feel free to throw ideas or suggestions in the chat. Okay, we have a suggestion from Sophie, and it's on the right track. It's saying if temperature is less than 60, the squirrels don't play. If temper is greater than 90, squirrels play only if it is summer. We're definitely getting there. We're definitely getting there. If you read the question a little bit more carefully, you'll see that there is still an upper bound for both of them. And it changes when it is summer. So it goes from 90 to 100 when it's summer. So if we want to return, for the return value of this function, we want to return whether or not the squirrels play, given the temperature and whether or not it is summer. So here, temp is a number, and is summer is a Boolean, so true or false. So we're going to use those to return the correct answer, which is also going to be a Boolean. So obviously here there are only two cases. There is whether it is summer and if it's not summer. And if it isn't summer, then we have a temperature region where the squirrels can play, which is between 60 and 90. And if it is summer, then we have a different region where the squirrels can play, which is between 60 and 100. So this would be very easy to code. We'd simply check to see if it is summer. And by the way, guys, when I do this, when I say if is summer, that's equivalent to saying if is summer is equal to true. You can basically, in Python, leave out this is true when you're evaluating a Boolean in an if statement, right? So I'll say here, same as if is summer, right? And then we're going to say here, we're returning whether the temp is between 60 and 100. So 60 is less than or equal to the temperature, which is less than or equal to 100. And else, which means if this means if is summer is false, then we have our other range, which is 60 to 90. And so let's give that a shot. All right, and we have a compile error on line 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. I forgot the colon here. So there's supposed to be a colon there, which is why we got that error. If we run it again, we'll see that we actually passed all the test cases, which is great. And hopefully this makes sense. So I'm going to copy this over here. And another reminder that this will be posted, this whole Jupyter Notebook will be posted on the Avenue, on our Avenue tab. So if anybody has any questions about this function, feel free to ask them. And I'll try my best to get to them. If there are no questions about this, then we can move on to the next one. And these do get a little bit harder as we go on. So I kind of want to leave some more time for the later ones. So for now, I'm going to move on. And if any questions come up, we'll get to them as soon as we see them. So let's take a look again at what we have. Our next one is going to be lucky sum, which is in logic 2. So we'll head over to logic 2, lucky sum, and we'll take a look. And I'm going to give you guys a couple minutes again to kind of read the question and get a bearing on where you want to approach it from, and then we'll take it up. Also, guys, if you think you want more time to think on it on your own, or less time, or whatever, just give me any suggestions. I'm not really sure, so feel free to let me know. Okay, any ideas on how we can approach this? I have a hint, and that could be that previously in the last questions, we kind of came at it with an idea of considering the different cases that we might have to consider. So for example, in the previous cases, I would consider whether the two cases where it was either summer or it wasn't summer, and we could treat each of those cases individually. There was another one where we considered whether the parrot was talking or if it was not talking, and we treated those two cases individually. So we can also split this one into different cases because each case would be treated differently in this question. And so for the sake of time, I'm going to... Yeah, actually, that's great. So Ju in the chat got that perfectly. So if A is 13, the sum is going to be 0 because the question says that if one of the values is 13, then that value and all the values to the right of it will not count towards the sum that we're trying to return. So if A is 13, then A doesn't count, and B and C, which are to the right of it, also won't count. However, if B is 13, then B and C won't count, but A will count, so our result will be A. And if C is 13, then A and B will count, but C will not, so it'll be A plus B. So we can simply consider, here we go. We can just say if A is equal to 13, then return 0. If B is equal to 13, return A. If C is equal to 13, return A plus B. And notice that there's a possibility that none of these if statements come true, which means that Python would skip over all of these return statements, right? Let's say we try and put this first example through our function, 1, 2, 3. So A is equal to 1, B is 2, C is 3. This if statement would be false, so Python would not even look at this code. And so would these other two if statements as well. So we need to have a final return statement for if none of these values are equal to 13, which is just going to be returning A plus B plus C. Because if none of them are 13, then we count all three values as part of the sum that we're returning. And so hopefully this makes sense because since we're returning right away, there is no chance of more than one of these if statements being evaluated as true. Because if the first one is evaluated as true, then we instantly return 0 and the function stops being evaluated. So as soon as we hit a return statement in a function, nothing after that is even looked at by Python, because as soon as Python hits this return statement, it jumps out of the function. So hopefully that makes sense. I'll leave a comment here. I'll say, as soon as Python hits a return statement, Python is done evaluating that function. So you don't have to worry about Python evaluating more than one of these. As true. And here we have a return statement to catch the case where none of the numbers are 13. So that's easy enough. We'll paste that over here again. And if anybody has any questions, once again, feel free to ask them. And if there are no questions, then I'm going to assume that you guys are all following and that there is no confusion. And I really do hope you guys ask questions. You can do else. Writing it as an else would work. It's just not necessary because we're returning everything. There are many different ways to do this. For example, you could return something like you could store everything in a sum variable, right? So you'd have something like and this would change it up a bunch, but you could say sum is equal to 0, right? And you could say if A is equal to 13, then sum is equal to 0. right? Sum is equal to A if B is 13. And here sum is equal to A plus B. And you would have something like this, right? You would say if, elif, elif, and then you'd have an else. And so actually, I think this is a great tool, and I can run this and show you that this works as well. And I'm actually going to throw this as an alternative in here. Alternatively, cool. So there you guys go. You have two different things. And yeah, you could return ABC, or you could sort in sum, and then you could return sum. Everything works here, right? It's just two different ways of doing it, and there's many more. So that's that. I'm gonna get rid of this. And we'll move on to the next one, assuming no more questions. So the next one is rotate left 3. So that's under list 1. So if you guys can navigate over to list 1 and find the rotate left 3 problem. And this one is a relatively simple problem, and there's many different approaches that we can use. But you guys can take a look, read it, and let me know if you guys have any ideas on how to approach it. Also, this would be a good time to ask, have you guys been exposed to lists in the lectures yet? Do you guys know what a list is in Python? Okay, awesome. Lists and tuples. So you guys know that lists and tuples are both ordered, which means that the order in those sequences are preserved. Basically, order matters in lists, right? Like a list saying 1, 2, 3 is obviously not as the same as a list that's 1, 3, 2, right? So with that being said, this question, we're given a list of 3 numbers. And what we want to do is we want to rotate that list leftwards in such a way that 1, 2, 3 becomes 2, 3, 1. So if you can kind of visualize what they mean by rotating there, 1, 2, 3, if you kind of push everything to the left here, like this way, the 2 would jump over here to the first, the 0th index. The 3 would jump leftwards, and this first one would kind of phase through this like wall and pop out on the other side. That's kind of what they mean by rotating left. So we have to find some way in Python to represent that change and return the new rotated list, right? So if they give us this list as an input to the function, we want to return a list that looks like this, and so on. So if anybody has any ideas, let me know. And if not, I will take up a solution in a minute. And while you guys do that, I'll quickly add the missing one from here. Okay, cool. So define list is 0, list.append 0. Oh, delete list at 0, list.append 0. Okay, yeah, that actually works. So the del command for lists is actually, it's a little bit frowned upon, and that's just like a kind of like an industry thing. It's more of like a good practice thing. But there are a lot of different ways that we can use that don't involve the delete command. Usually there are cleaner ways to write functions that involve the delete command. So Alifer says swap. Yeah, that's a great idea that we can use. Basically what's happening here is that we're kind of swapping everything around, right? So how would we swap this? Do you guys know how to swap two numbers? Like let's say I had A and B. How would I swap the values in A and B? Like let's say A held 4 and B held 5. If I want to swap the values, how would I do that in Python? Do you guys know? Yeah, exactly. So that's great. So what we can do is we can swap exactly as Alifer said, except that you missed one thing. If this is nums at 0, then the last one would be nums at 2, not nums at 3. So careful, because what you wrote down would go out of bounds by 1. But you have the right idea, which is what matters. So what we can do is we can say nums at 0 and nums at 3 become nums at 3 comma nums at 0. So what this is going to do is it's going to swap, sorry, 2. It's going to swap the first and last. So after running this line, we're going to have 3, 2, 1. So if we have 3, 2, 1, and we want to go to 2, 3, 1, what is the last thing that we need to do? Well, you can see here that the 1 is now in the correct place. We just need to swap these first two elements. Now we need to swap the first two elements. So yeah, basically this can be done in 2 swaps. That's kind of the idea. So you can say nums at 0, nums at 1 equals nums at 1, comma nums at 0. And now we can see that nums is going to be equal to 2, 3, 1, which is correct. And so if we run this, we get it all wrong because we didn't do it right. Because we forgot to return nums, which is what we've been working on. So never forget to actually return what's expected. That's pretty important. And yeah, that makes sense. So hopefully this makes sense to everybody. We can rotate things by just swapping twice. What we can actually do as well, I just want to show you guys. First, I'll just put this in here. And then I'll show you that alternatively, there is another way to do this. We can actually do it in one line. Because you can actually swap more than 2 elements at once. So what you can actually do is you can say nums at 1, and then you can add another element separated by a comma and say nums at 2. And now you can say the new ordering. So 0, 1, and 2, that ordering is going to become 1, 2, 0, right? It's just going to shift over. So 1, nums at 2, comma nums at 0. And this will actually work. We can, yeah. I can copy this over to CodingBet and show you guys. And you can see that if we recompile it, we still get everything correct. So feel free to ask any questions. And if there are no questions, then we're going to move on. I'm going to save again. We finished this one. We finished this one. We finished this one. And the next one. So these were the ones that actually Mr. Moore required that we do today. And he suggested that each TA pick 2 more of their own choice. So I picked these 2. So if we don't get around to doing them all today, feel free to take a look at these 2 problems. But for now, since there are no questions, I'm going to go over and do the first one, which is count evens, and that's under list 2. So we can go over and start for list 2. Go into count evens, which is right here. And so here, the function is asking us to return the number of even integers in the given array, which in Python, arrays are just lists. So they're talking about lists. And an important hint is to take advantage of the modulo operator, which returns the remainder of a division. So if you guys know, 5 divided by 2 is equal to 2 remainder 1. So the modulo operator returns the remainder from a division instead of the actual answer. And that's going to be important in computing the answer to this question. So if anybody has any suggestions, ideas, feel free to throw them in there. Basically, we have to find out some way to find out if an element inside a list is even or odd. And we can do that very easily using modulo. So we have a suggestion here. If mod returns 1, the string is odd. Yeah, very close. It's not a string, it's an integer. Integers can be even and odd. Strings cannot be even and odd. Strings are, strings. They're just sequences of characters, so it wouldn't make sense to say that like this word is even or odd. More so applies to numbers. So, but you're right in that if the number modulo returns 1, that number is in fact odd. And respectively, if the modulo of a number by 2 is 0, then it's even. So basically, we can divide a number by 2 and see if the remainder is 0 or 1. If a number evenly divides by 2, it means it's even. And if it evenly divides by 2, that means that the remainder, when we divide an even number by 2, will always be 0. So for example, 16 mod 2 will always equal to 0 because it's even. AKA there's no remainder when we divide by 0. So that will apply to all even numbers. So what we can do then is we can say for every number in this list numbers, and so hopefully Mr. Moore has gone over this kind of this syntax for iterating over the elements inside a list. Basically, we're taking each element inside the list nums, and we're storing it in number for each iteration, right? And first we're going to define a counter, right? And every time we hit an even number, we're going to up that counter by 1. And then at the end, we're going to return the number in that counter, right? So we can say for number in nums, if number modulo 2 is equal to 0, and if this condition is true, then the number is even. So if this is true, then we're going to increment counter by 1. And that's it. And so for every number in nums, it's going to check if that number is even. And if it is, it's going to increase the counter by 1. When our for loop is done iterating over this list, it'll simply return whatever number is stored in counter, and that will hold the number of even numbers, because we incremented it by 1 every single time we hit an even number. So hopefully that's an intuitive solution for you guys. We can compile that code and see that it all comes back as correct, which is great. And so I'm going to paste this over here for you guys. And if you guys have any questions, please ask them. And if not, then we're all good. Can we do rotate left again? Yeah, sure. Let's do rotate left again. So I want to take a look here at the first solution, which is kind of the intuitive one, which can be done with regular swaps in Python. And then this second solution is kind of done with like a shortcut. Basically, Python allows you to swap multiple values at the same time, more than 2 values. Usually when you think of a swap, you think of 2 values, but Python actually lets you swap more than 2 at once. But in the regular way, here what we can do is we can just swap the first and the last. Let me actually demonstrate this. We start with 1, 2, 3. Right? We start with 1, 2, 3, and then what we do over here is we take nums at 0, which is this first element, right? And nums at 2, which is the last element, right? Because it's indexed 0, 1, and 2. And this line of code is swapping index 0 and index 2 of nums. Is basically saying that nums 0 gets assigned to nums 2, and nums 2 gets assigned to nums 0 at the same time. And that's key. That's key because we can't just do this, right? We cannot do nums 0 equals nums 2, and then nums 2 equals nums 0. This would not work, because if we set nums 0 equals to nums 2, then now nums 0 is equal to 3. And so in this second line, if we try to set nums 2 to nums 0, nums 0 is no longer 1. It is now 3. So we're setting this equal to 3. So instead of 1, 2, 3 becoming 3, 2, 1, it would actually become 3, 2, 3, which is not what we want. We wanted to swap the first and last elements, right? Which is why we cannot do it sequentially like this. We cannot assign them sequentially. We actually have to do it at the same time, which is what actually enables Python to do the swap, right? What happens to 2 then? Sorry, don't we also have to swap the middle? We do swap the middle, but we do that afterwards. So what I'm trying to show you guys is that we start off with 1, 2, 3. We swap the first and the last one, and we get 3, 2, 1. So here I'm saying, if we have the list 3, 2, 1, this is what nums looks like right now. How do we go from 3, 2, 1, which is the result after this line, to 2, 3, 1, which is the final result that we're trying to accomplish? Well, all we need to do to go from this to this is to swap the first 2 elements, which is going to include that middle element now, right? So here we're swapping 0 and 1. because that would be the first and the second element. Because we're swapping 3 and 2, it would become 2 and 3, and now we have 2, 3, 1, which is exactly what we were after the whole time. Does that make sense, Maitre? Okay, cool. That's great. Another question from Juhu: when will the assignment 2 be released? I believe it should be released anytime from today. Like at the latest, it will be released as soon as assignment 1 is due. But if it is, it'll either be released when assignment 1 is due or earlier. So there is actually a chance that it gets released today or tomorrow. I will check with the professor and I will make an announcement as soon as it's released on Avenue. So that's that. And another question, Alifer, what is counter plus equals 1? Counter plus equals 1 is a way of incrementing. That's how we increment a variable by some number. So that's good that you mentioned that. I'll say that it's basically shorthand for counter equals counter plus 1. So we're basically assigning counter the value of counter plus 1, which is essentially incrementing it by 1. And obviously, if we wanted to increment it by a different value other than 1, we could put any number here. We could put 200, and we could do that by saying counter plus equals 200. So that's just a shorthand, a shortcut to saying this, right? Hopefully that makes sense. All right, are there any other questions regarding anything that we've done today, or assignment submission procedures if you guys need help with that still? Or anything else for that matter? Yeah, sure, we can do questions about the assignment. So for everybody else who doesn't have any further questions, thanks for coming, guys, and hope it helped. Just a reminder that you guys can always reach me on Teams via Teams message if you guys have any questions, and I will be there to answer them. And obviously, don't forget about office hours and Piazza, which is going to be a really great tool. So good luck on assignment 2, and see you guys next week. And yeah, you guys will be able to find this this Jupyter notebook on Avenue when I upload it today. Yeah, no problem, guys. All right, so let's go on to taking up some of the questions regarding the assignment. So I'll go over here to A1. And we have a question regarding Newton's law of universal gravitation. So did you have a specific question regarding this this function? Cool. Okay. So you're trying to return. You're trying to understand why the return value, why we're returning fg instead of m1, m2, and d. You were trying to work through it like you did with question 6. Question 6. Oh yeah, question 6 was going from minutes to days, hours, and minutes. Okay. So the question here is actually asking for the force of gravity between two masses, given their masses and the distance between them. So, like, you could imagine that that was like a physics problem. Like, if I give you two masses and I tell you how far apart they are, based on this simple formula, you should be able to provide what the force of gravity between those two masses is equal to. So here, the question already kind of sets you up with a return statement where you're returning FG, because they're expecting that you should just be able to, you know, say FG is equal to, you know, some formula based on this. Like, all you have to do is just put this formula into Python, basically, right? Because this function takes in m1, m2, and d. And for g, by the way, guys, if you're not sure what to say for g, we kind of give you a hint here. It's 3, 3, 3 are the values for m1, m2, and d. And you see that the expected answer is 6.674 e to the negative 11. That's because if mass 1 and mass 2 are both equal to 3, 3 times 3 is 9. D squared, if d is equal to 3, d squared is 9 as well. So the masses and the distance squared will cancel out, and the force of gravity will simply be equal to the universal gravitational constant g, which means that this answer is actually what you should be using for g. So, right, you could say something like g is equal to 6.674 e negative 11, and then you could say here, you could say g times, you know, I'm sure this is not hard. Like, it's g times, you know, mass 1, so on, so on, so on. I can't really go too far without basically writing down the answer, but that's kind of the gist of it. And then once you calculate FG, then all you have to do is return it, which is already set up for you, and you'll be good. Yeah, no problem. And obviously, just a reminder that like variables don't really matter. Like you could store this value in G and then use G in your calculation, or alternatively, you could obviously just use that number as it is without representing it in a variable first, right? Like, you could just do that and then multiply that by the rest of this function. And I'm sure that would make sense too. So yeah, that's that for that question. Hopefully that helps. If anybody has any other questions regarding anything, feel free to ask. And if not, I'll head out in a couple minutes. All right, looks like no more questions. So thank you guys again for coming, and feel free to reach out on Teams if you guys have any other questions. And yeah, best of luck on the next assignment, and I'll see you guys next week.